You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Greetings, everyone. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily, episode 1557. Today's show is an excerpt from the Retired Racehorse Radio podcast here on Horse Radio Network. Show co-hosts Kristen and Joy are joined by Jody Busch with a chat about a type of hackamore called a Bosal or Bosal. Today's show is brought to you by USRider.
Even under the best circumstances, travel is stressful for horses. We've all been there, stuck on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. You can make the journey knowing that USRider is there for you. Get peace of mind on the road with USRider's nationwide 24/7 roadside assistance coverage for both you and your horse. Join today at usrider.org.
Joy, I'm very excited for our guest today. This is based on a listener request. So I posted, I think sometime in the past couple of months on our social media, just a picture of my little standardbred Wes in his Bosal setup. And we had a listener comment like, please tell me more about this tack. I would like to know all the ways of this particular piece of Western equipment. And in my mind, I was like, I have the perfect guest for this. So we have with us today, Jody Busch. She trains horses and teaches clinics in Saskatchewan, Canada. She would describe herself as a horse crazy 4-H kid who never grew out of it, which same. Jody's worked in many parts of the horse industry, including a couple of stints at the racetrack, and she's dabbled in many disciplines. She spent time at cutting and reining barns and worked with dressage and jumping trainers. Jody's current focus and specialty could be described as foundational riding for all horses, with an emphasis on helping challenging horses overcome those challenges and giving young horses a good start. Although she rides all breeds, thoroughbreds are her passion, and the process of restarting a horse off the track and creating that strong foundation for a new career is her favorite thing to do. If you've ever gotten to see Jody work with a horse at the makeover, she is a beautiful rider, extremely talented, and we're very, very happy to have her with us. So Jody, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller. So I'm happy to be here.
Oh, fun. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, welcome aboard our crazy train. So I'm super excited to geek out with you about Bosals today.
I have to pause, Kristen. Is it Bosals or Bosals?
Well, see, I was like, we can address this right off the bat because I don't know that there is a right or wrong in my experience.
I feel like it's
Jody,
like a territory-based, like regional thing.
Yeah, I think it's a territory-based thing. It's also depends on who you learned from. Really, in this tradition, you'll see people use different words for things. So I'd even go so far as to say we're going to talk today about a hackamore, which is a Bosal or a Bosal with a McCarty or a McCate. And again, those words are all dependent on where you're from and who you learn from. But we're all talking about the same thing, I think. And
I trust you more than I trust my dad, Jody, because he always told me it was Bosals. And I'm like, I'm going to ask someone who actually knows what's going on.
I've had this debate before with a whole group of people, and it was like pretty much split 50-50 down the middle of like who said what and where they learned it from. And it was a little bit geographic too. So yeah, that might be a geographic thing as well. So Jody, describe, so if listeners have never seen this, and obviously we're not working with a visual medium, so this is a fun challenge, but what does this rig look like? Like if someone walks into a tack shop, what do they see on the wall?
Yeah, so when I talk about a hackamore, and I know that word can be used to describe like a mechanical hackamore or various bitless bridles, even like a rope halter hackamore some people talk about. When I'm talking about a hackamore today, we're going to be talking about a Bosal and a McCarty. So those two things together make up the hackamore, and that's the entire rig. So the Bosal is a rawhide core that's braided over top with either rawhide or leather or rawhide and leather. There are some, and I would say that these are very much not the traditional ones and not the ones I would recommend, but there's some that have other styles of core. But for the purposes of what we're going to talk about today, we're talking about rawhide core with leather rawhide braided over top of it. It looks something like a teardrop shaped noseband. It's firm, but not stiff. Like there's definitely some give to them. And then the McCarty is basically your reins, but it's a special setup. It's tied to the bottom of the Bosal, there's like a loop rein, and then there's get down rope or a lead rope basically that comes out the front. So when you're riding in your hackamore, if you need to get off to do something, you've kind of got that built-in lead rope.
And see, here's another difference. So I've always pronounced it Makati. Those can come in horsehair if you're like super traditional, or all sorts of other materials. Like I use a nylon one just because it's easy to clean.
Yeah, for sure. Horsehair is traditional, and I love horsehair. If you live in a really wet climate, horsehair is not ideal because when you get it wet, it becomes very stiff. But where I am, it's dry. And so horsehair is really nice. It has a nice feel. The horses feel it on their neck really well. And then you can have anything else, basically anything round. So you can have nylon rope, yacht braid rope, climbing rope, braided paracord. A lot of people use kind of braided paracord. It gives the similar feel to mane hair because it's braided, but it doesn't have that same issue if you get it wet.
The difference with a Bosal versus other hackamores, because you're right, a lot of people are like, oh, a hackamore, or oh, a bitless bridle. And when I get those comments, I'm always like, yes, but. And it's in that like, yes, but part, I think, is where the difference between this particular hackamore rig and other sort of the world of bitless bridles, there's a lot of difference there. So how does the Bosal action work that makes it a little bit different from, let's say, like a mechanical hack or even just a rope halter?
Yeah. So a hackamore, the idea with a hackamore is that it's like a signal device. So the horses are supposed to, in this tradition, they're supposed to respond off of signals. So there's not a lot of direct pulling. There's not a lot of holding. It's all about signals and the way the hackamore is balanced on the horse's nose. When you pick up the rein, the horse will feel that because of the balance. And when you release the rein, it releases very quickly. And so it's not a leverage device like a mechanical hackamore is, but it does pull from underneath the horse's chin. And so it can encourage sort of those like shorter flexions in some ways because of the balance. It's not like a constriction device, like some bitless bridles, you'll know when you pull on them, they will actually constrict on the horse's nose. So it doesn't do that. It fits, something like a hat. And it's not the same as, say, like a halter or a side pull, which I use halters and side pulls all the time. I do like them. But it just has a different kind of a signal. It's not quite as lateral as, say, a side pull, for example.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, especially with the signaling, because of the weight and the balance and the way these things are constructed. And yeah, all this is doing is giving me ideas for things to put on our social media. But, we're going to have to, show a video of how the action works on these, because you're right. As soon as you lift a rein, that's going to give the horse a signal. And it's up to you as a rider, of course, to be very wary of the signals that you're giving. So I hit on one word that we've both repeated, I think, at this point. It's tradition. So, it's kind of fun to me to have this piece of tack that is not just a piece of tack. It is part of a long-standing horse training tradition. So can you speak a little bit more about that? Because I know that you are a huge aficionado of this whole process and how unique it is.
Yeah. And not so much even just a piece of tack, but a piece of art.
Yes.
And that's something that I love about it. I'm not a bling person, but I do love the fancy bits and the fancy braided nose knots and all these things. So I love the idea that I can get, an artisan to make me a piece of tack that's going to be similar to something people were using, hundreds, and probably hundreds is fair, at least 100 years ago. So the tradition comes out of California, and it's sort of based out of a Spanish riding style. So it was the Spanish folks who came to California and established the big ranches, took the Spanish kind of style of riding, which would be, in that sort of bullfighting kind of style. So that Baroque, very upright horses, the nice arched necks. So they took that Spanish style and they adapted it to the California ranches. And it was a tradition that was very much about like getting a job done, but also the pride and the artistry of the horsemanship, of the gear, of the training process, because it's a training process that is meant to take many years. For English people, I think we would compare this to like the development of a dressage horse, where you might end up riding your horse in the double bridle eventually. And that would be akin to, the bridle horse tradition or the vaquero tradition, trying to develop their horse into riding straight up in the bridle.
And that in and of itself, now we're going to have more people being like, oh my gosh, what on earth does that mean? So don't worry, because we're already planning a part 2 to revisit this tradition. But, speaking back to the tradition of this tack and, how it's been going for hundreds of years, off air, Jody, you mentioned that you had a pretty unique set of tack that was really meaningful to you. So tell us about that.
Yeah, that goes back to when I first got my horse, Joe, for the 2018 thoroughbred makeover. And that, Kristen's where I met you and Jobber, yes, of course. So there was a clinician, he was a cutting horse trainer, traveling clinician up here in Western Canada, named Dave Smith. And I rode with him a lot as a kid and a teenager. And he just taught me so much about horses and riding horses and getting along with horses in a way that's really, kind to the horse. So when I was looking for my thoroughbred makeover horse, he came with me and he helped me actually pick out Joe. And when he came back every so often, when he was in town, he'd stop by to sort of see me and see how Joe was doing. And I was riding Joe in kind of a cheap hackamore, the best hackamore I could afford. And he said, that horse is too good for that cheap gear. And he brought me this beautiful bridle bit and 2-rein setup. And he just handed it to me. And he said, you ride him in this in Kentucky. And I said, well, I can't afford this. And he said, it's a gift and you can give it back if I ever need it again. Now, he was so old at the time, I knew that was his way of saying it was a gift. And yeah, I rode Joe in that. And I rode Papa Al in that also in the freestyle at the makeover in 2021. And it's very old. He bought it in the 1940s in the States.
Oh my gosh.
Somewhere in the States. He couldn't even remember where. So it's very old. And the reins, they're braided rawhide reins. And they are so ornate and beautiful and really special.
Oh, I love this. Ooh, yeah, I have little shivers too. I love that.
Same here. This is beautiful. And I definitely feel like I'm getting teary-eyed.
Yeah, you sound like you are, Joy.
Okay. It's beautiful.
But I love that comparison, with that and bringing along the dressage horse, because I know we do have a lot of English-based listeners who are familiar, of course, with that long, slow, careful, thoughtful progression of a well-schooled dressage horse. Like you don't just pop the double bridle on them right away and trot down center line like that. That process takes a long, long time. So, and the hackamore is meant to be a step in that process. So if you're following that traditional vaquero progression, do you start with the hackamore and then move up from there?
Well, that is $1 million question. And that really depends on who you ask. I don't think there's a right answer. I've done either. And so there are those who would say that traditional vaqueros didn't use snaffle bits. And that may be the case, that the snaffle bits came a little bit later historically, but snaffle bits have certainly been used within that tradition for a very long time. And so some people that follow this tradition will start their horse in a snaffle, then use a hackamore. Then they'll progress to a 2-rein, which is a small hackamore underneath your bridle. So that's traditionally a spade bit, but doesn't have to be a spade bit, but a solid bit. So you use the hackamore for most of the time, and then you might pick up on the bridle reins every once in a while, use the bridle reins. You fade that to where you're using only the bridle reins, and eventually you ride your horse straight up in the bridle, which means that you've gotten rid of the hackamore and you just have usually what they call an under bridle Bosal, just to show it's sort of decorative. It might be used also for leading the horse to some extent, but it's to show that the horse has progressed through that through that process. And that would take like a number of years for sure.
Yeah. I think this is one of the reasons I'm kind of drawn to this tradition, because like it takes the time it takes, and it's okay if you're in one quote unquote stage or step for a long time. Like I'm only just now getting to the point where I'm comfortable not in the snaffle.
And it's not a one-way street.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you can go back. So if you ride your horse in the bridle for a bit, one of my other mentors calls that test your teaching. So you go and you ride in the bridle for a while, and you find out what the holes were when you were riding in the 2-rein or the hackamore. And then you can go back to your hackamore and you can fix that. And then the next time you ride in the bridle, it's a little better. And it's kind of, I don't know, iterative, I guess is the big word that you would use to describe that. You can just keep going back, circle back.
Yeah. That's how I've described the hackamore to people as well. Like that is the hole finder. So if you think you've been tooling around pretty good in your snaffle, as I tend to do, then, when things are going pretty well, pop that hackamore on and just see, like, is your horse actually listening to your seat and your leg? Or are you just pulling him around by the bit all the time? So you can tell how this usually goes for me. So I'll be doing that as well this summer. I think in 2021, in one season I showed Jobber in the snaffle, the hackamore, and then he's not in like a full spade bit. It's just a curb, but I do use the Rommel or Rommel. That's another word you can pronounce 100 different ways. But I've gone back and forth, even in the course of the same show, depending like, okay, that class didn't go well. Let's try this next class out, So yeah, it is very much a cyclical kind of, it's a good reminder that training does not progress in a straight line. We'll say that.
Yeah. I think that's so accurate though, just for everything this show is about, especially with ex racehorses, that it's never a straight line. It's a very curly cue all over the page.
Yep. Loops everywhere.
Yeah.
So independent of this, very cool Vaquero tradition, which we could talk about for a long, long time, who else would be a good candidate to give a hackamore like this, as opposed to, a side pull or a mechanical hackamore? Like, who should give the Bosal a try? And how do you try it for the first time if you've never done this before?
Yeah. So I would say that it can make anyone a better rider. And that's really, like, if you said, why should I use a hackamore? I would say because it forces you to be a better rider. And if you're a better rider, your horse is going to be better. It prevents you from taking shortcuts. It prevents you from skipping steps. It means that you can't manhandle the horse or intimidate it. You have to actually teach them. So it makes you a trainer. And I think anyone who's interested in restarting a thoroughbred is probably someone who's interested in being a trainer, even if you're not a professional trainer. And so I think the benefits that you can get from learning to use it can just be huge. You can't pull on a hackamore. The horse will learn to run through it really fast. And so it makes you use your seat and your body to control their speed. It makes you use bend to get your downward transitions. It makes you, and it keeps you really, really honest. And I think one thing about thoroughbreds, and there's many ways to restart a thoroughbred, of course, and I'm not even going to say this is the best way, but I think this is an excellent way, is part of what they do is their RPMs are always a little high. So they're revving high, and then we're holding with the reins. And that's what they're used to at the racetrack. So they're sort of revving higher, and then you're holding the reins. And they don't find sort of that neutral rhythm. And the dressage people would talk about that as sort of a rhythm problem, I think, when they're talking about the training scale. If you just continue to pull and have a tug of war with them, it can be really unproductive for a really long time. But if you can let go and ride them on the buckle and use loops and circles and bend and one rein to kind of help them find that neutral, you can kind of reset how they feel about rein pressure much more quickly. And then you can use your reins for productive things like steering and balancing. rather than kind of constantly using 60% of your rein pressure just to manage that sort of revving engine. And the hackamore is just a beautiful tool to facilitate that transition for them.
I'm going to listen. I'm just going to like lift that soundbite and listen to it when I ride my standard bred in it, because that's re-inspired me to be a little more mindful of how I'm using it with the standard bred. So have you ever worked with a standard bred, Jody?
I have. Yeah. Not straight off the track, but I've ridden standard breds that were pretty recently retired. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love them. I do.
Yeah. And I think this can be a really good tool for them as well, as, you know, depending on their background. So the one I have was an Amish cart horse for, I think, probably about 15 years before I got him. And he didn't have much of a mouth when I got him. So I just was like, well, let's give this a go. You know, instead of me constantly pulling on the bit on you, we're going to just take the bit away. So that's maybe not the most traditional way to use the hackamore, but it did work to sort of reprogram him. But I know I've gotten heavier on it in the past year, and, you know, he just gets heavy right back. So I'll take that little Jody soundbite to remind me to stay light and let him loop around and revisit how this actually works and do it the right way.
I absolutely love this. And I'm very curious to try it, but as everyone knows, I'm a little baby dressage princess. I'm pretty soft with my hands, and I like to do a lot of like low and long stuff, like getting my horse to go on the buckle, but she still has that bit. She still has that like comfort emergency stop should I need it. How can someone who's not a Western rider feel a little more comfortable with trying this out, especially if they have an X-race horse? I mean, it's like having a Ferrari and you're never sure if you're going to accidentally put the gas pedal all the way down.
Mm-hmm. So I think I have two answers for that, Joy. And the first one maybe people aren't going to love, but the first answer is you can't stop them with the bit if they don't want to stop anyway. And I've been run away with by racehorses, and if they really don't want to stop, like the bit is sort of a bit of a crutch for people because we feel like we have probably more control than we actually do. So I would say all of us are probably better riders than we think we are if we just think about what we're doing as we're doing it. And then the second thing is you can teach all of this to the horse on the ground first. So that sort of lateral bending off the hackamore can be taught on the ground. It can be taught off a halter doing groundwork. And if they really understand that they can bend and stop on the ground, then you're going to be so much safer on the back. And you're not going to get into that situation where, you know, you've got this funny thing on your horse's nose and now you can't stop it. So yeah, I would say give it a try and think about trying it from the ground first and make sure that it kind of is working on the ground.
I think that's a great suggestion and much smarter than what I recently did, was like hopping on my horse bareback in her halter and was like, this is safe after a week off. And she doesn't know nose pressure or anything like that. But I think it'd be really fun to try. And even in that, she went off my leg much better than I expected. So there's a little confidence boost to try this out.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've never met your horse, Joy, but I somehow just from watching her go in videos, I just have a feeling that she would really enjoy this. So I think
she probably would. If you make anything a game, she is willing to play with you. It's when it becomes work is when you get some spice out of it. She's not a worker, but she will play.
I was just going to say there's one more reason, specifically with the thoroughbreds, that I think a hackamore can be such a wonderful thing. And again, this maybe applies to all bitless type riding, is that we tend to have these thoroughbreds that come off the track with funny little bit habits, like the chomping and the twisting and the lip flapping and all of that stuff. And I have found with like a number of thoroughbreds off the track now that if you ride them in a hackamore, and I think this would apply to other bitless bridles as well, suddenly that will go away and you can go back to using the bit a year later and they don't have those same sort of weird habits.
Ooh, okay. So yeah, my poor husband's going to have to use the hackamore now.
I know. So is your poor friend Joy. It's going to be exciting. It's always content. That's the great thing. All of it creates content. But
so
this has been
Jody,
absolutely fascinating. Really has been.
Yeah. So for people like Joy who are now inspired to be like, I'm going to go out and get a hackamore, are there resources available for how to fit one properly? Because they are not really a one size fits all kind of a tool. You do have to fit it to the horse. So how do you recommend for people who are looking for more information to get started or figuring out how to size one for their horse? Where should they go?
There should be lots of websites. I don't want to be an advertisement for Martin Black, but his website has some really good information about, fit, where they sit on the nose, how they should fit, how you shape them, how you tie them. Sort of an 11-inch hackamore is a pretty standard size, but your big-headed thoroughbreds might need a slightly bigger one. I have a 12.5-inch one that I tend to use on the bigger horses. They're made for quarter horses generally, and so they tend to just be a hair on the small size for our bigger horses. And you can adjust them. One of the beautiful things about them is when you tie your McCarty on your hackamore, you can add and remove wraps so that it fits either, more snug or more loosely. And so although one size doesn't fit all, you can definitely fit it to a variety of horses by adding and removing those wraps.
Okay. And I still need to watch a YouTube every time I do that to make sure I'm doing it the right way. Because
do you always,
I'm going to FaceTime
untie
Kristen.
it?
No, I don't. I tend to leave it tied, especially because it's a nylon. So I'm like, well, this is fine. But I do have to change the wraps if I switch it from West to Shorty, because they're just two different sort of like muzzle sizes at that part of their face. So when I do, I'm like, I've got to go back to the old YouTube. But thank God for that. I don't know what the traditional vaqueros did, but it certainly wasn't consult the YouTube. So thank God for technology.
Yeah, they probably did it 3 times a day. So it makes it easier.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing for sure. So Jody, in general, are there, good resources or clinicians that people should follow if they want to learn more about this style of horsemanship?
I think if you sort of the usual suspects would be like the Martin Blacks and the Buck Brannemans. There is the old books by Ed Connell are sort of your go-to books if you're into reading books. Jeff Sanders has some great books, really great history books about the history of California and how the tradition came to be. If you're into history, that's a great one to look at too.
I love that. And where can listeners find more information about you and your horsemanship?
So I've got Jody Busch Horsemanship on Facebook, and then I've got a little sort of side Facebook page for the thoroughbreds, which is called Good Start OTTB Training. So they could check out either of those.
Wonderful. Well, Jody, thanks so much. I am re-inspired to try to do better with my hackamore this year. And hopefully we've inspired Joy to go out and get one.
Sure have. I'm curious now.
I love that. Jody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there you have it. Horse Radio Network has thousands of engaging podcasts for horse people, and you can have them sent right to your phone. Just subscribe via your favorite podcast player. This is Coach Jen, and I will be back again soon with another tip. Until then, go ride your horse. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements made by guests on the Horse Tip Daily. Please use your own judgment when listening to the tips on this show.